She was the oldest, largest, and loudest at the auction. A shy farmer chose her anyway. Red River, 1948. I counted the nail heads in the courthouse fence post before I'd let myself look at the platform. 41. I'd counted them 3 times by the time the auctioneer banged his gavel for the first one. That's the kind of thing my hand does now since the islands. Counts things, keeps it busy so it don't shake. They called it a bride auction in the flyer Pete Doonan nailed to the feed store door. But it wasn't that, not exactly. It was the Ladies' Aid Society raising money for the new well. And the joke of it, the bit that drew half the county in on a Saturday, was that the women stood up one at a time and a man could bid for the right to walk her to the social that night and buy her supper. Nothing more than that. Everybody knew it. But the money went up regardless, and the men hollered regardless, and the women who got bid on high stood a little straighter walking off that platform, and the ones who didn't, well. I wasn't going to bid on anybody. I'd told myself that driving the truck in, told myself that parking it, told myself that walking past Earl Kessler, who clapped me on the shoulder like we were still 19 and said, "Good to see you out, Walt," like getting out of my own house was an accomplishment now. Maybe it was. The first 3 women went for $2 and $3 apiece, laughing, blushing, the men whooping like it was a calf scramble. Pretty girls, young. The Hutchins boy bid $11 on Lucille Adair, and the crowd about came apart. Then Reverend Dale called the next name off his list, and there was this pause, a little hitch in his voice. Miss Augusta Pell. I knew who she was before she came up the steps. Everybody in Red River knew Gus Pell. Ran her daddy's place alone since he died of the dropsy 2 winters back, 240 acres of cotton, and a stretch of bottomland nobody else wanted to fight the river for, and she fought it every year and won more than she lost. 6 foot if she was an inch. Hands like a man's. A voice that carried clean across the church lot when she was hollering at her hired boy for letting a gate stand open. She came up those steps like she was climbing onto a wagon to do a job, not like the other girls had, all soft-footed and pink. She stood there with her arms crossed and looked out over the crowd like she was daring it. Nobody bid. Reverend Dale said 50 cents, opening, and the silence sat there so long I heard a mule shifting its feet behind the feed store. She didn't flinch. I'll say that. Her chin stayed up. But I saw her hand, down at her side, close up into a fist and then loosen, close and loosen, the only part of her that gave her away, and something about that, about a woman that big and that strong-voiced having one small thing she couldn't keep still either, went through me like a current. Somebody behind me laughed low and said something to his friend about how the Lord made some women for plowing instead of dancing, and the friend laughed too, not loud, just enough. My hand stopped counting nail heads. $2, I said. I didn't plan it. The words came up out of someplace lower than thinking. My voice cracked saying it, hadn't used it for much besides talking to the mule in 3 days, and half the crowd turned to look at who'd spoke, because I wasn't a man who spoke at things like this. I wasn't a man who spoke much at all since I came back. She looked at me. Across all those heads she found me, and her face didn't do what I expected. Didn't soften, didn't go grateful and small the way I'd half-dreaded, like she needed rescuing and I'd be the rescue. She just looked at me hard, like she was deciding something, weighing it the way you'd weigh a hog before you bought it. $2.50, called a voice off to my left, and a snicker went with it, and I knew without turning that it was meant as the joke, the kind of bid a man makes to be funny, to see how high you can run a thing up that everybody's already laughing at. I felt the heat come up my neck. $3, I said. He's serious, somebody muttered, surprised, and that needled me more than the laughing had, the surprise that I'd mean it. Reverend Dale, bless him, didn't milk it for sport. He looked at the joke bitter, and the man just held up his hands, done, the fun used up. $3 going once. Augusta Pell was still looking at me. I made myself hold it. 6 years ago, before the islands, before my hand learned to shake, and my voice learned to go quiet, I couldn't have held a woman's eyes like that for love nor money. I held them now because looking away felt like one more thing in my life I'd be letting walk off without me saying my piece. Sold, the Reverend said, for $3 to Walt Brennan. The crowd's attention slid off both of us quick, the way crowds do, already turning toward the next name on the list, some Coker girl, pretty as a postcard, and the bidding went up to $9 before I even got my feet moving toward the platform steps. She came down them on her own, didn't wait for a hand, wouldn't have taken one if I'd offered, I expect. Stood in front of me with her arms still crossed. "You don't have to follow through," she said, flat, like she was giving me an out before I asked for one. "Plenty of men bid for the joke of it and then make themselves scarce before supper." I wasn't joking. "I know you weren't, that's near about worse." She looked at me a second longer. "Why?" Not asterisk why me, just asterisk why. Like she wanted the mechanism of it, not the flattery. I thought about lying, saying something easy, and found I didn't have it in me. The same way I hadn't had small talk in me since Okinawa. The same way I'd stopped being able to say things I didn't mean even when meaning them cost more. "Heard a man behind me say the Lord made you for plowing instead of dancing," I said. Wanted him to watch somebody disagree. Something moved in her face, not a smile, not yet. More like a window unlatching, the first crack of air through it. "That all?" "No," I said, and that one came up out of the same low place the bid had. "You didn't put your head down, up there. Everybody does when nobody bids, you didn't." She studied me a long moment with those gray eyes that I'd find out later could go the color of river water before a storm. Then she said, "Supper's at 6. Don't expect me to make it easy on you, Walt Brennan." "I don't know how." "Didn't bid $3 expecting easy," I said, and for the first time in 2 years I heard myself say something that came out almost like a joke, and it surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise her, because she huffed, not quite a laugh, but close enough kin to one that I felt it land somewhere under my ribs and stay. We didn't say much walking to the church hall where the supper tables were set up under the oaks. I wasn't built for walking and talking both at once anymore. The islands had taken that from me too, that easy way men have of filling silence with nothing in particular. Augusta didn't fill it either. She walked like she farmed, even strides, eyes forward, and once when my bad hand started its shake against my trouser leg, she glanced down at it, just once, and didn't say a word, and didn't look away quick like she'd caught herself staring at something shameful. Just looked, the way you'd look at a fence post to see if it'd hold weight, and then looked back up the road. Nobody had looked at the hand like that. Most folks either pretended they hadn't seen it or asked me straight out what happened, wanting the story, wanting the war wrapped up tidy in 3 sentences they could carry home and tell their wives. She did neither. She just let it be a thing that was there, same as her own hands were big and her own voice carried too far for church. At the tables, old Mrs. Hutchins set out the ham and the beans and made a to-do over every other couple, cooing about how fine they looked together. And when she got to our end of the table, she opened her mouth and then looked at the 2 of us, me quiet, and stooped some at the shoulders these days. Augusta straight-backed, and a head taller than I was sitting down. And she just set the ham plate between us and moved on without a word, which told me plenty about what the town thought of this particular match. The 2 leftovers, the broke man and the big woman, paired off like the last items on a shelf nobody wanted enough to fight over. Augusta caught the look Mrs. Hutchins didn't quite manage to hide. I watched her catch it, watched her jaw set. "They've been doing that since I was 14, she said, not to me exactly, more out at the yard. "Sizing me up like livestock and finding the scale wanting. My mother used to tell me I'd grow into my height. I'm 31 years old, Mr. Brennan. I believe I've finished growing." "I wasn't waiting on you to shrink," I said. "No," she said, and looked at me sideways. "You don't strike me as a man waiting on much of anything." That one had teeth in it, but not cruel ones, more like she was testing whether I'd flinch. "I was a man waiting to get back here," I said. "Spent 2 years in places so wet and so far from Texas I forgot what dust smelled like. Used to lie there at night and try and remember the exact color of the dirt out past our south fence. Couldn't ever get it right in my head. Came home, first thing I did before I even went in the house, I walked out to that fence and just stood there looking at the ground a good long while. My daddy thought I'd gone simple." She'd stopped eating, was just looking at me now the way she had on the platform, weighing. "My daddy used to say the same thing about me," she said. "Simple for staying. Every man who courted me sooner or later got around to telling me I oughtn't run the place myself, oughtn't be out in the fields, oughtn't holler at the hired help the way I do. Like there was a smaller, quieter version of me hiding in here somewhere that they'd rather have if I'd just let her out." She picked her fork back up, set it back down. "There isn't. This is the whole of it. Big and loud and 31, and not shrinking for anybody's supper table." "Good," I said. "I wasn't fixing to ask you to." It wasn't smooth, what I said. None of it was smooth, the whole evening, two people talking like they were relearning a language they used to know, feeling out where the words still fit. But something in her shoulders came down a half an inch when I said it. And I noticed, the way I noticed the angle of a fence post, the way the army taught me to notice everything, every detail, because details were the difference between coming home and not. It wasn't one supper that did it. I want to say that plain, because if I let myself tell it like one evening fixed 2 years of silence, and a county's worth of looking down on us both, I'd be lying. And Augusta never had much patience for a man who lied even a little to make a story prettier. It was 3 months of Sundays. She came out to my place first because her well had gone bad. The one the whole auction was meant to fund a new one for the church, while her own sat cracked and silting up half the summer. And I had a pump I could rig for her, and I didn't think twice about offering it, the way you don't think twice about handing a man a tool he needs. She stood in my yard while I worked the pump loose with my good hand and my bad one steadying, and she didn't offer to help in that way some folks do, hovering, waiting to catch you if your hand failed you. She just watched, and when the bolt finally gave, she said, "You've got a method to it, working around the shake instead of against it. Took me a season to learn that with my bad knee." I hadn't told her about a bad knee. She just had one, same as I had a hand that shook, and she'd named it plain, no asking for sympathy, just laying the fact down next to mine like 2 stones from the same field. I started going to her place Wednesdays after to help with the part of the cotton that wanted 2 strong backs instead of one, even though my back wasn't what it used to be, and my hand slowed me some. She never once told me to sit it out. Never once treated the hand like a thing to be managed around or apologized for. Worked me like she'd work any hand she'd hired, hard and fair. And somewhere in the working I found my shake came less, my voice came easier, my shoulders came up off the stoop they'd settled into. Town talked, town always talks. I heard it secondhand from Earl Kessler, who meant it kindly enough, that folks said it was a fool match, the quiet broke soldier and the big loud spinster, 2 damaged things propping each other up because nobody better wanted either one. I told that to Augusta once, out at her bottomland, both of us up to our shins in river mud, trying to shore a washed-out section of fence before the next rain finished the job the last one started. She didn't even look up from her work. Let them talk. They'll talk whether we're happy or miserable, so we may as well be happy. Doesn't bother you what they say. It used to. She drove the post in hard, 2 strikes of the mallet, and stood back to check it was true. I spent a long while trying to make myself smaller so it'd bother me less. Spent more years than I care to count standing exactly the way I stood on that platform, waiting on somebody to bid, telling myself if nobody ever did, it was because there was something correct about it, something I deserved. She looked at me then, mud to her knees, hair coming loose from its pins, not a thing about her soft or small or what the magazines would call pretty, and every bit of her the most arresting thing I'd looked at since I came home from a war that took the color out of most everything else. Then a man stood up in front of the whole county and said $3 like he meant it. I've thought on that a good deal since. Wasn't much of a bid, I said. Wasn't all I had on me even. Wasn't the amount, she said. It was that you said it out loud, where they could hear you instead of just thinking it and letting it go quiet like most men do. I've had men think kind things about me, Walt. I can always tell. They just never say them where it costs them anything. I asked her in October in the field, no platform under either of us, no Reverend Dale running the bidding, just the 2 of us and a wagon of cut cotton, and the light going gold the way it does out here right before the cold sets in for good. I didn't have a ring yet. That came later, small as I could afford and twice as much as I could, and she wore it like it weighed nothing, like it had always been there. What I said was nothing fancy. I've never been a man for fancy words, before the war or after, and I wasn't about to start lying to her now, of all people, the one person who'd never once asked me to be smoother than I was. I counted nail heads on a fence post the whole first hour of that auction, I told her, because I didn't trust myself to look up and want something I figured I had no right wanting. Handshakes too bad, heads too quiet now, I don't talk easy, I don't dance, I got a farm that's barely holding and a war in me I don't expect ever fully leaves. I'm not much of a bid, Augusta. Never claimed to be more than $3 worth. I never asked you to be more than yourself, she said. Asked that of every other man who ever showed interest, and every one of them came up short trying. You're the first one who didn't try at all, just stood there shaking and said what was true. That a yes. It's a yes, she said. And there wasn't a thing soft about how she said it, no catch in her voice, no eyes gone misty. She said it the way she'd agree to a fair price on cattle, certain and final and entirely her own to give. And then she put her big rough hand over my bad shaking one. Right there in the cut field with the wagon waiting and the light going down gold over both our places that would be one place soon, and held it still. Not to fix it, just to hold it. I do believe, she said, looking down at our two hands together, hers steady, mine not. That's the first time anybody's touched this hand of yours like it wasn't broken. Wasn't waiting on fixing, I said. Was waiting on you. She didn't answer that. Didn't need to. Just stood there in the gold light holding my shaking hand still in her steady one, the oldest, largest, loudest woman the county had ever tried and failed to make small. And I thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that the Lord hadn't made her for plowing instead of dancing. He'd made her for exactly this, standing her ground, and it turned out for me,